Rhetoric before the crowd in Republican Rome played a very important role in the political process of the city-state. Consuls, mayors, and other officials, even private persons, privati, addressed the people in different circumstances. Under these circumstances, as described by Cicero in his rhetorical treatise Brutus, and supplemented from other sources where appropriate, we can distinguish two groups of orators at kontiones, i.e., at informal popular assemblies took place usually before an official vote at a centuriate or tribal assembly, which were the main official assemblies of all Roman citizens, one that undermined the Respublica and one that supported it. The latter was characterized as the group that seeks to uphold the constitution, in praesidiis rei publicae, while the former as the one against it, causing it turbulence, turbulenti. The above distinction, though Cicero himself, for obvious reasons, when one considers the time of the publication of the work, 46 BC, does not state explicitly that he did it, is absolutely evident in his work, as it will be seen from the following analysis. Additionally, without this distinction, it is impossible to understand the rhetoric of kontiones in Rome as Cicero saw it and especially as he applied it in practice. The same is true for the concepts of popularis, popular politician, and eloquentia popularis, popular eloquence, which are directly related to this distinction. In essence, this is the basic political conflict on the rostra, the platform for the orator in the Forum Romanum, from Cicero's perspective, below the surface of a history of rhetoric in his Brutus. In other words, this is how Cicero himself makes sense through time binding. The thread that separated the two above groups is demagoguery. According to this logic, the orator characterized demagogue acts ostensibly for the benefit of the people, but actually distributes gifts and promises in the final goal to centralize all political power in his hands. Within this frame, he also resorts to the public and over-targeting, sometimes reaching up to the slander, of his main rival, the Senate, the members of which were all elected by the people, and therefore his oratory is deeply divisive. He aims, in other words, to overthrow the polity of the Respublica and transform it into a completely monarchical regime under the guise or even the uncritical veracity of his particular sensitivity towards the always existing, of course, problems of the crowd and the alleged people's exploitation by the Senate. Consequently, by appearing himself as the supporter of the interests of the people, he is thought to be a popularis, and his eloquence to be the eloquentia popularis. Examples of such demagogues appear in the Roman history, especially in the second half of the 2nd century BC, in a time that is where Rome has reached the pinnacle of its political power and its constitution has gained maturity. So we are at a turning point where the social demand for a fairer redistribution of wealth and other goods of the Roman Empire in favor of low-income citizens and of those who wanted to become citizens, combined with the personal ambitions of prominent Romans, whether they were of aristocratic origin or not, for acquisition of political power by securing the valuable, because of the type of the polity, favor of the people, since every male citizen had the right to vote. This combination is for Cicero the enemy within the Respublica, which indeed, in the absence of any other substantive external opponent, is the only real enemy that threatens the ancestral Roman polity and in this sense the identity and existence of Rome. The line of the turbulenti goes down to Caesar. The most capable orator of this line was Gaius Gracchus, 154 to 121 BC. Cicero states it very clearly. His loss was irreparable, both for the affairs of Rome and Latin letters. His education was similar to that of his brother Tiberius, since their mother Cornelia was, to her last moment indeed, a friend of Greek letters. Greek schooling came to be added to his genuine talent and special study of continuous improvement through training. Thus, he reached the level to be the orator with the clearest Latin expression and, at the same time, the most sophisticated diction amongst all Roman orators ever. The reason, however, Gaius Gracchus, despite his great value as an orator, is included by Cicero within the turbulenti is clearly seen in Dio Cassius's judgment, who characterized him like-minded with his brother, but unlike him, naturally turbulent and crafty. Cicero, on his turn, is restricted to the very indicative wish that Gaius Gracchus had shown his country the kind of loyalty he had shown to the memory of his brother. Indeed, in his attempt to secure popular favor, Gaius Gracchus promoted some populist reforms in economic and social terms. But the problem was that Gaius Gracchus himself benefited from these reforms, ensuring for himself, with the consent of the people, powers that though exceeded the limits of the Respublica. Plutarch, somehow justifying Cicero's comments, goes as far as to compare the ability acquired by Gaius Gracchus to automatically select those members of the class of equites, Roman knights, who would be judges based on his own reform, with the monarchical power. Nevertheless, Gaius Gracchus could not overthrow the Respublica. He had only his oratory to be based on and nothing more. This fact seems to be the reason why Cicero does not contemn him fully. But a few decades after him, the Turbulendi acquired a more dangerous weapon to combine with their oratory: the Roman army. Gaius Marius, as a consul in 107 BC, in order to recruit as many citizens as he could for the war against Jugurtha, invited everyone for the first time, regardless of income, to participate and share the impending victory. Additionally, Marius, by doing this, wanted to challenge the senators. Without any doubt, Marius's intention was to create a personal army vehicle to fulfill his high ambitions. Sallust, although he also raises the opposite view, underlines the fact. The selection of needy soldiers served mainly Marius himself, because they would depend on him for their own survival. So if they had to choose between loyalty to the Respublica and execution of an order of Marius, they would obviously choose the latter. This assumption is crucial to the course of the Roman constitution in the coming decades. In the meantime, Sulla had to stab Marius. However, what an uneducated soldier like Marius failed to do, Caesar did. This man was a combination of a Gaius Gracchus, as concerning his Greek education, and of Gaius Marius, as concerning his military skills. So, with the support of the people, the Popularis Caesar, by the time he was murdered, managed to be elected dictator for life. After him, the ancestral Respublica was gone forever. On the other hand, according to Cicero, during the long period after the dethronement of the Etruscan kings, 509 BC, to his era, there were always in Rome those orators of popular assemblies whose action was beneficial to the Respublica. For them, we could aptly generalize the judgment that they were the guards of the constitution, in presidiis Republicae. This meaning not that all of them were not able in other rhetorical genera besides the political. And they acted like this not only because of their social status and origin, of which indeed the latter was not given for all of them, since social mobility was a vivid reality in Republican Rome, but as a clear political choice. Their presence in the forum ensured firstly the pro-constitutional functioning of the Respublica, and secondly the aesthetic enjoyment not only of the Romans, but even the Greeks, who, it should be noted, consistently regarded as the most suitable to judge the quality of rhetoric. The real meaning of the pro-constitutional functioning of the Respublica was, according to its supporters, that it, like Cicero, that it maintained the distinct roles of the people, the Senate, and the elected officials in it, and its manifest democratic base, as the offices, which were open to all, and the laws of the state, i.e. almost all political power, emanated from the right of voting, which every male citizen enjoyed. Therefore, reasonably, the kind of oratory that had these goals did not allow itself the divisive phraseology of pushing one constitutional factor against the other. On the contrary, it aimed at holding the people together, concordia civium, so that they would be able to realize that their rights were not granted and that their true interest was to keep the democratic base of their constitution upon which to work for a better future. So, according to this kind of oratory, it was the citizens' responsibility not to lose their dominant position in the Republic, because this was the best way to support their interests. The reforms, moreover, to the extent they did not cast doubt on the structure of the constitution, was perfectly acceptable, even welcome from this thread. The most capable orator within the above group, in Cicero's point of view, before himself was Lucius Licinius Crassus, 140 to 91 BC. For Crassus, the eloquent orator, is not just one who speaks effectively due skill and experience alone, but he who embodies the orator doctus, i.e. one that combines education, he basically meant Greek education, and rhetorical skills. The most basic elements of Crassus's oratory was knowledge, especially from the fields of laws, history, administration, and psychology, ethics, and wit. Crassus, equipped with these oratorical weapons, addressed his popular audience, gained its acceptance and vote, and truly promoted its interests without undermining its position in the constitution or the position of the other constitutional factors. From Cicero's point of view, it really worked, and therefore this was the only type of oratory that could be properly characterized eloquentia popularis, and consequently the orators like Crassus were the real populares. For Cicero there is no dilemma in determining himself as a politician and an orator. He chooses to participate in the latter group of orators from the beginning of his career to the end. His Kontiones, speeches before the crowd, are the fullest expression of this thread as a peak, in fact, of its development in political oratory of Rome, because they combine crucial political messages with highly elaborated oratory. Key elements of his oratory, which is the pinnacle of true, in Cicero's mind, eloquentia popularis, are the strong theoretical background on which it is built, the auctoritas of the orator, the authority, the prestige, resulting from all the actions of his life and the offices bestowed on him by the citizens, deep philosophical education, knowledge of the issues raised before the public, and above all, faith in the state form of the Respublica. This faith is based on the wisdom of Majores, ancestors, who formed the Respublica in the logic of the combination of three constitutions, democracy, aristocracy, and monarchy, in order to achieve, as far as possible, realistically what Plato describes as the ideal state. Therefore, all the key players in the Roman polity are treated on the basis of concordia, and for this reason Cicero expresses essentially the same views consistently when addressing both the people and the Senate, only taking care not to recklessly challenge popular sensibilities that emerged historically out of favor showed by some politicians of the past, like the Gracchi or Marius, towards the lower classes. And in this last case, however, Cicero indirectly but definitely supports his unswerving political positions. Thus, with his Kontiones, Cicero is not trying to tie people to the chariot of the Senate, as it has been supported by some scholars, but addresses one of the three state factors whose role is crucial for the proper operation and adjustment of the ancestral constitution to the political circumstances he faced during his career. Moreover, from Cicero's Kontiones, one fairly concludes that the real master of the political life of the Respublica was Populus Romanus, the Roman people, the carrier of polity's democratic and liberal character that made up the idea of libertas, liberty, the power of every male citizen's right of voting, social mobility, and finally, democratic oratory. More specifically, against his contemporary background, Cicero's alternative was to make people realize the danger ensuing from the demagogues and therefore reinforce, presumably because in his mind the people were the real rulers of the Respublica, politicians like himself, who contra arma verbis, with words against arms, struggled to maintain the democratic basis of government, and army leaders who were not directed against the fundamental nature of this form of government, as Pompey was eventually, despite his weaknesses. This alternative was not utopian. In fact, it attracted many supporters, as evidenced by the action taken by Cicero at the time of his Philippics, speeches against Mark Antony, like Demosthenes' speeches against Philip of Macedonia, northern Greece, when, according to the expression of a scholar, he became as powerful as he never was in the prime of his life, managing to mobilize almost the whole of Italy for the defense of democracy. That's why he called himself a true popular politician, popularis verus. By writing his rhetorical treatise Brutus, Cicero did not want to present a simple historical catalogue of Roman orators. What he really did by this was to make sense through time binding and thus to clarify terms like popularis and eloquentia popularis, and consequently to describe the lines of orators that deserved and did not deserve to be considered popularis. Clearly for him there was a political struggle in the history of the Republic which could not be ignored between these two lines of orators. Based on this way of explaining history, he placed himself amongst the pro-constitutional orators and fought for this purpose consistently to the end. Therefore, for Cicero, making sense through time binding meant fighting for democracy. And I'm finishing. Nevertheless, at that time, Cicero failed and was executed. So his way of making sense through time binding turned him into a victim. However, it seems that he is finally vindicated by the course of the history. Democracy has now prevailed, and so Cicero's point of view, but there is something more than this. Cicero left us a model of a political struggle, and its final outcome in a constitution of democratic basis, where though there was room for demagogues to act. It seems that mutatis mutandis, the ongoing economic crisis in some modern democracies around the world, and in Europe especially, could be very well explained to a major extent by Cicero's model. Thank you.